Hi, everybody. It's Geezer Bill here today with Geezer Scott, who is undertaking a very interesting challenge. He's going to talk about a 50-year-old album that is by a band that is very difficult to describe as far as I can tell, because I did some of my checking into Renaissance and the album that we're going to be talking about, Prologue. And as far as I could tell, when I was younger, my only background will be that I was familiar with this band because I knew it fit into a spectrum of bands that I was interested in, but I never really delved into their history or really heard any of their music. And so what's interesting to me is what I've discovered is that it's a very evolutionary outfit. And I think Scott is going to explain a little bit about how the band had evolved and continued to evolve, and where Prologue fits in this whole spectrum of the band's history. Scott.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, Renaissance, very complicated history of this band. The origins of the band is pretty complicated. You can go to Geezerology.com, and I wrote a piece about that to give some details of where this band came from. But I'll just hit a couple of high points. Basically, it started out when the now classic band, the Yardbirds, back in the late 60s and long about 1969, the band broke up, and the lead guitarist of the band, a guy by the name of Jimmy Page, went off and started a band. The drummer of the Yardbirds, the lead singer and bass player of the Yardbirds, Keith Relf, and the drummer Jim McCarty went off and started a different band called Renaissance. Keith Relf brought along his sister Jane, and they had a couple of other came out, and they recorded an album, 1969 or maybe it was 1970. Self-titled, called Renaissance. And it was sort of and Bill, you can help me with this a little bit, but I have the impression that they kind of went in a direction where bands like Fairport Convention were. It's sort of a electric, more folk-oriented sort of sound. And the original Renaissance, the Keith Relf Renaissance, and that first album, sort of added a little bit of classical influences to the folky sound. So they recorded the album. It did okay in the United Kingdom. Nobody heard it in the United States. But they came back and did a second album. Well, by this time, Ralph and McCarty and all the key players in the band, they were all getting tired of touring and recording. And Ralph decided he wanted to become a producer. McCarty decided he wanted to be a songwriter, and they were all kind of losing interest. And they got together because they had a contract for a second Renaissance album. And they recorded 3 or 4 tracks, and they all kind of lost interest and just kind of all went their own ways. And then the manager of the band, a guy by the name of Miles Copeland, who we all know that name, well, he had to get this album complete, so he went out and started pulling in some people, and a completely different band ended up recording a couple more songs to complete this album called Illusion in 1971 that only ended up getting released in Italy, I think, and maybe a couple other European countries, and it just kind of went away. So Copeland now, he's going, oh, he wants to do something. Well, he had a songwriting duo, people by the name of Becky Thatcher, who's a lyricist, Michael Dunford, who was a composer. He wrote music, and Dunford was one of the guys that he pulled in, and Dunford played the acoustic guitar, who finished off this previous album. Well, Copeland wanted to keep the band Renaissance together because he liked the songs that that Dunford and Thatcher were writing. So he wanted to put together another band similar to the original Renaissance band to record these songs. And he held some auditions, and he discovered a woman by the name of Annie Haslam, who just had this incredibly strong, 8-octave voice that he just that Copeland just fell in love with. He also found a keyboard player, piano player by the name of John Tout, and he decided that he was going to build a band around Annie Haslam's vocals and John Tout's piano playing. He pulled in a few more people. Bass player John Camp came along through an audition. Drummer Terrence Sullivan came along through an audition. And they also had a lead guitar player that they found by the name of Mick Parsons. So he's got this new band now put together, still with the same songwriters that he ported over from the original incarnation of Renaissance. And they started to record an album. And then, well, the lead guitar player, Mick Parsons, before they even got started, he died in a car accident. So he quick went out and found another guy by the name of Rob Hendry to play guitar on this album. And they went into studios in London in the summer of 1972 and recorded this album, which is now titled Prologue. And this was, we don't know exactly when this album was released. It was recorded in summer of 72. We just know that it was released in the second half of 1972. We're not sure when. It was a small record label called Sovereign that released this album in the UK, and it eventually came out in North America and things like that. But it didn't go very far. But the most notable thing about this album is this is the first time that Annie Haslam that we hear her voice on record, and she became such a force during the prog movement of the middle 70s, and still to this day she's still around and still is well remembered, and she's still recording, she's still working. But just an incredible voice, and probably is what makes this record most notable. Now Renaissance went on after this. They didn't make much of a splash with Prologue. This was the third Renaissance album, but the hardcore Renaissance fans who still remember them well, and most of the history, this is really the first Renaissance album that meant anything. It was the first Renaissance album with a classic lineup, with the Annie Haslam led lineup. They went on to record in the 70s a run of 3 more albums after this that are just that are very, very well thought of and well remembered as key albums during the middle 70s prog era. The next one in 1973 was Ashes Are Burning, and that was their breakthrough album. In fact, that's where I got onto them. I went to a Wishbone Ash show in 1974 in St. Louis, and the opening act was Renaissance. They were there as after they recorded the album Ashes Are Burning, and that's how I got onto them. I heard this opening act, and I heard this woman's voice, and I just, I flipped. I was in a seat on the floor. It was in Kiel Auditorium. I was in a seat on the floor, and after I heard this woman's voice, I found myself in the balcony. This thing just tossed me all the way up to the balcony. I mean, it blew me away, and not just because of her voice, but I really liked I liked their entire approach to music. It's just really just beautiful music. Just very emotional, just very good music, and that's how I got onto them. Ashes Are Burning was really their first notable album in 1973, and I got onto it in 74. And then a few years later, Capitol Records, which signed this band and had some success with them later. Well, they re-released. They did a package in like 1978. They did a release as a double album. It was a re-release of Ashes Are Burning packaged with Prologue, and that's how I first heard this album. Prologue it's an interesting album for Renaissance fans, because you hear the big difference between this album and what Renaissance did going forward was this guitar player I told you about, Rob Henry, who they just pulled in an emergency to record this album. Well, he quit after this record was made. This wasn't his cup of tea, so he left, and not much is known about Rob Henry. Man, I looked trying to find more information on this guy. I couldn't find anything about him anywhere. So I have no idea who this guy was or what happened to him or anything like that. But Henry here, what you don't hear in the Renaissance albums going forward is there's a bit of guitar-based rock going on here, which is different than you hear from any other Renaissance album. After Henry left, Renaissance decided they decided to proceed without a guitar player. Right? They just everything was built around John Taut's mostly piano, a little bit of organ, but mostly his piano, his classical piano. And they replaced the guitar player with an orchestra. They recorded their next 3 albums with an orchestra. And they're considered classic albums. It all culminated with their live album at Carnegie Hall in 1978, which is considered a fantastic live album at the time. Michael Dunford, who was the composer that Copeland brought along here to write these songs, well, Dunford did and later become a performing member of the band, but he played acoustic guitar. He didn't play lead. He didn't play electric guitar. He played acoustic guitar, and they spent the mid-70s with 3 or 4 very well acclaimed albums without an electric guitar, and it worked very well. I mean, great music. It was very classically influenced music. Now, the 2 songs on Prologue that give you a hint of what's going on. There are 2 songs here. The closer of side 1 is Sounds of the Sea, which Annie Haslam, I just saw a recent video where she still performs the song. And then the opening song on side 2 called Spare Some Love. These 2 songs are really the preview of what Renaissance was to become in the intervening years after this. So you hear this classic Renaissance sound on those 2 songs, in particular on this album. The opening song, Prologue, became a staple in Renaissance live shows, but mostly because it was just a nice workout for Annie Haslam. There's no lyrics to the song. It's just Annie Haslam just using her voice as a musical instrument and just singing syllables, not words. And that's really the enduring song that came out of this one. It closes This album closes with an 11-minute piece called Raja Khan, which is the big sort of rock guitar workout on this. It's one of these songs where there are no lyrics here. It's another one where Annie Haslam, she uses her voice here, but she doesn't sing any lyrics. It's just atmospheric vocals. And this is sort of more like an instrumental workout where everybody in the band kind of gets their piece, and especially the guitar player Hendry. This is where he made his big contribution to Renaissance, was on the song Raja Khan. And it's just a throwaway. It's interesting to listen to that this is the same band that turned out some of these great classical folk albums of the mid 70s. So it's interesting to listen to what this band might have sounded like if they would actually became a rock band. But it's a good album. There's some good early Renaissance work here, and there are some things going on here that you never heard Renaissance do again. So this is basically a transitional album when they were still trying to figure out exactly what this band was. Miles Copeland just kept having to pull people in and put it together, and as it turns out, once the guitar player Hendry left, and they decided to go with an orchestral sound for the next few albums, they did finally settle in on a lineup from Ashes Are Burning for their next 3 or 4 classic albums and they became the Renaissance that we all know and love and remember now. Good album, a good museum piece that worth listening to. It's worth listening to hear where this band came from. And there's some good hints of what Renaissance was about to become. So thumbs up and happy 50th anniversary to Prologue by Genesis. I'm sorry. Happy 50th anniversary to Prologue by Renaissance.
Thanks, Scott. That's something I will give a qualified thumbs up to myself. I agree. Annie Haslam's voice is spectacular, and you can really kind of sense what's going to happen down the road. The other stuff to me is a little bit, they're still trying to figure things out, and it's going to take a while. So I guess the title of the album is very appropriate because it really is a prologue.
Even though it was a third album, it was even though it was the third Renaissance album.
I know.
Prologue.
Yeah. We're going to keep on calling it Prologue.
Yeah.
If we replace every member of the band, is it still the same band?
Yeah, it's really funny that second album, Illusion, which nobody really ever heard until about 10 years ago. It finally got released in the United States. It disappeared for decades. And you listen, it is really funny because that album, the preceding album to Prologue, is actually an album made by 2 different bands, but it's the same songwriters.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different band than the one that now did this album.
All of these components are very different from what you would expect. So you think of a rock and roll band, no matter the genre, you're thinking, okay, by this point, a band is self-contained. They are writing their music, calling the shots, overseeing the production. They know who's in the band, and they all work collaboratively. And here you see, all of those factors are not necessarily present in the least. It's a kind of a recruited band that comes together, via Miles Copeland's oversight, and and there's very happy confluences of material that fits, but the material fits the band because the band is assembled to perform the material, not the other way around.
Right.
And that works well. I mean, and as they settle into their role, that's where they can start to actually move it in a direction where everybody is pulling in the same way, and it does yield much more fruitful benefits down the road.
Yeah. Basically, this started was you had a manager who had a contract and a couple of songwriters that he liked. and so this all got put together to fit what he already had his hands on. The songwriters, like I say, Michael Dunford and Betty Thatcher. Of course, like I say, Dunford then became a performing member of the band on the next album. He wasn't on this one. But Dunford and Thatcher continued to write, I think, pretty much all of their songs through their entire the life of the band through the 70s. I mean, after they ran through their peak period in the mid 70s with their next 3 albums, then some of the band members, actually, I think Annie Haslam started writing a little bit, John Kemp started writing a little bit. But Thatcher and Dunford continued to be their songwriters through the 70s, with and every now and then Jim McCarty, the former drummer who founded the original band here, he would drop in and compose a song every now and then, but mostly it was Dunford and Thatcher who wrote all their material through their classic period. So you definitely there's definitely that cohesion there, where even though the faces were different, the spirit and the approach to the music came from the same place, right? And that was kind of the glue that held it all together until they got it all figured out. An interesting history and an interesting approach, but yeah, they were very successful with it for a while. And I say, Annie Haslam is still around, still touring with a band called Renaissance, and still recording with a band called Renaissance. It's she's the only one left, but she's still working with it. That's all I got, Bill.
Well, thanks, Scott. It was an enlightening history lesson, and it's a record that definitely merits investigation if you're interested in that whole branch of the English folk rock kind of branch that evolves into, in Renaissance's case, a much more classical music-oriented outgrowth. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening.
Thanks, Bill.